Iran's military infrastructure has been systematically dismantled. Its navy is gone, its air force has been neutralized, and the country's air defense capabilities have been wiped out. Radar systems that once monitored incoming threats have been destroyed, leaving the regime effectively blind. Piece by piece, nearly every major pillar of Iran's military strength has been knocked out. What remains is a weakened regime, trying to project power despite losing the tools it once relied on to defend itself. As the United States and Israel continue to dismantle Iran's military capabilities, the true nature of this conflict is beginning to reveal itself. While the Iranian regime attempts to dig in and maintain control, it continues launching attacks toward neighboring countries in desperation. At the same time, protests and pro-regime demonstrations are suddenly appearing across the United States. Critics claim these demonstrations are not grassroots movements, but organized efforts allegedly funded by foreign actors, including interests connected to China. China has publicly called for an end to the war in Iran, but there is a deeper economic reason behind its concern. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and more than 20% of its oil supply comes from Iran. If that supply disappears or becomes unstable, China's energy security could be severely threatened. The ongoing conflict, therefore, represents not only a geopolitical crisis, but also a major economic risk for Beijing. Observers have pointed out that many protests taking place abroad appear highly coordinated rather than spontaneous. Some activists themselves have admitted that organized groups were heading to protest locations carrying pre-made signs and slogans. Critics argue that these demonstrations are designed to create the illusion of widespread grassroots opposition, when in reality they may be supported or financed by wealthy political interests attempting to influence public opinion. Supporters of the current military pressure on Iran argue that the coming days could dramatically escalate the intensity of attacks on the regime. They claim the two most powerful air forces in the world are now focused on dismantling what they describe as a terror-supporting government. According to this perspective, the conflict ultimately revolves around energy resources, specifically oil, which remains one of the most powerful strategic assets in the modern world. China's dependence on imported oil is a major factor shaping global politics. Roughly 70% of the oil required to run China's economy must be imported from abroad. Without a stable supply of fuel, China's economic growth and military expansion would be significantly constrained. This dependence makes regions like the Middle East critically important to Beijing's long-term strategy. For decades, authoritarian regimes such as those in Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba formed a loose network that provided economic and political support to larger powers like China and Russia. These countries helped each other evade sanctions, exchange resources, and maintain influence in global politics. Through trade agreements and covert partnerships, this alliance allowed sanctioned states to survive, while simultaneously strengthening the geopolitical leverage of their larger partners. China's relationship with Iran is particularly significant. Analysts estimate that China purchases roughly 90% of Iran's sanctioned oil exports, often paying for it using its own currency instead of US dollars. This arrangement allows Iran to continue funding its government while bypassing Western financial systems. In return, China gains access to large quantities of discounted oil that help power its economy. Without this financial lifeline from China, Iran's ability to maintain its military programs would be dramatically reduced. Revenues from oil sales have historically funded Iran's ballistic missile development, nuclear research, and regional proxy networks. This has led some analysts to argue that the Iranian people seeking political change are not only confronting their own government, but also a wider system of foreign support that keeps the regime financially afloat. The conflict, therefore, has implications far beyond Iran itself. Iran has supplied drones and other military resources to Russia, while simultaneously acting as a critical oil supplier to China. Some geopolitical strategists argue that the survival of Iran's regime is strategically important for both Moscow and Beijing. At the same time, China's heavy reliance on Iranian oil means that any disruption could cause major economic pain. When more than 20% of a nation's oil supply comes from a single partner, instability in that relationship can quickly ripple through the entire economy. If Iran's regime collapses or dramatically changes direction, China could lose one of its most valuable energy partners overnight. Supporters of political change in Iran argue that the country itself possesses enormous economic potential. Iran sits on an estimated $20 trillion worth of oil reserves, along with vast deposits of gold, lithium, copper, and other valuable resources. Advocates of reform believe that if Iran were to open markets and political freedoms, its citizens could benefit from extraordinary prosperity, rather than seeing those resources used to sustain authoritarian rule.
Another major issue tied to this conflict is the global oil currency system. For decades, most international oil trade has been conducted in US dollars under the so-called petrodollar system. Some countries, including China, have explored alternatives that would allow oil to be traded in other currencies. If that shift were to occur on a massive scale, it could weaken the economic advantages the United States currently enjoys in global finance. Meanwhile, the conflict has also affected international shipping and energy transport routes, particularly through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important oil transit points in the world. Insurance companies covering ships in the region have faced enormous risk due to the possibility of attacks or military escalation. These uncertainties have disrupted global markets and triggered sharp reactions in stock prices and energy trading. Ultimately, the struggle surrounding Iran is not just about one country. It touches on global energy markets, the balance of power between major world powers, and the future of political systems across multiple regions. Whether the outcome leads to regime change, diplomatic settlement, or prolonged conflict, the consequences will likely reshape alliances, trade networks, and geopolitical strategies for years to come.